Welcome back to the Indiewood Podcast. This is a podcast about independent film and the many hats filmmakers have to wear in order to get those films made. With me this month, I have the wonderfully talented Gene Gallerano, who is a director, actor, Emmy Award-winning producer who is not only innovative enough to pivot on a dime, but also I think courageous enough to take opportunity when it comes. I think, you owe a lot of your success to that, ability to take opportunity when it comes. Whether or not it's going to bear fruit. You're like, this opportunity, yes, I'm going to run with it. But, we talked a lot about that in episode 1 and 2. Your journey, your films, your ability to pivot. You have such a history where you're an actor, you're a director, you're a producer, and a writer. So I wanted to talk about casting because I feel like you have a really unique perspective, being an actor, doing casting from that side, then being a director, casting from the opposite side, and as a producer, who I think is, it's a uniquely different perspective from a director, from a casting standpoint, and then also as a writer, like, do you focus on certain actors or certain talent when writing? But let's start as an actor. So when you enter a room, what is your experience and how has it changed since you've crossed that Rubicon and gotten to the other side?
You mean like as the actor walking into the room, or being in the room and an actor walks in?
Both. So like when you started, as an actor and you were getting cast and you were doing plays and you were doing film, and then now seeing that world from the opposite end, like how has that changed your view of the process, and also like how would you, or how have you changed your approach to auditioning and getting cast and stuff as an actor now that you've experienced it from the other side?
I heard a musician, this Greg beatboxing flautist, shout out Greg Patillo, genius, say that sometimes he was a part of this group project trio, and they would say they were like this chamber group with this obviously beatboxing flautist, there's rad dudes, and they said if they went into with an audience that was rowdy and not listening, they would play really soft, and slowly they would start seeing everybody like get quiet and look over and like perk up and start stopping their conversations, being like, what's happening? And they'd get their attention. I heard that. I thought, man, that's fucking genius. I should use that in my auditions. And so like, this is the only trick I have. It's the only trick I have. It's,
Does that work?
And so what I do is I would, especially in like theater, like, because when you'd go into rooms, now you don't go into rooms anymore, right? Which is a total bummer. But you'd go into the room and, they're like in the old days, they'd be like looking at your headshot, the directors, the casting director, maybe the reader was like looking at the lines, and, you wouldn't have anyone's attention. And so I would just wait for a second and like an uncomfortable amount. And they would slowly look up and I would hit the first line. I was like, okay, I got him. Now what happens between that first moment and the rest of it is, a million things can happen. And sometimes you bang it out of the fucking park and you're like, there's nobody else that's walking away with this role. And then sometimes you bang it out of the fucking park and you're like, I did everything I absolutely can. It's out of my hands. Sometimes you bomb. Sometimes you deconstruct from that moment on.
Yeah. I've had a moment like that, but in pitching to a producer where I bombed real bad. I like choked. And thankfully, like speaking back to Creative Pivot from the previous episode, I like took stock of the moment, noted it to kind of bring it to a meditative place, and then like was like, hey, I'm so sorry, I just choked, let me try again. They're like, great,
wow,
you're doing phenomenal.
Oh,
keep
cool.
Going. Well, I wasn't doing phenomenal. They didn't take the pitch. They had some great notes, but they didn't.
Did you get it back on the rails?
Yeah. But the problem with that project was they said, this is great, we love it. Problem is Netflix has 4 of these projects because it was based on public domain. So
but you got it back on the rails.
I did, yeah.
That's good. Good for you. I've done that a couple of times. Sometimes you have to. Sometimes it's like it's back to one. They do it all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason. And like back to one means you don't just come back reloaded with where you left. You go back to
Start from the
one.
beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a million versions of that, and acting is really fun on that capacity and getting to take the ride. I think the great Tom Hanks said, you have to love auditioning because sometimes that's the only performance of that role you're going to
Yeah.
get. I mean, he said
Hmm.
something like that, but it's the idea of like if you learn to love the audition process, which I was a terrible test taker, I am a terrible test taker. So that was an excruciating process for me, probably so limiting. And it's not necessarily about talent, it's about like, gotta get the job too. And
Yeah.
that's a part of it. Some people like are fucking phenomenal test takers, but they're not the best after that.
Yeah.
They're not the like
Yeah.
endurance athletes. And
Hmm.
I mean, acting is very fickle, and everybody is up against so much of themselves. And I remember one actor, she was a great commercial actor, and she told me, I'm just really good at talking. I just talk. And I was like, oh, that's good. And and she sold Advil and Tylenol and every drug out there, and she made a ton of money doing it.
Hmm.
And she had her thing. And so I think people like, there's a lot of components to that, like walking into a room, acting, being willing to open yourself up, understanding how to work the room. I mean, now it's like Zoom, and I know some people like it. I've found it, and like a lot of the actors I know, the bummer about it is, if you're like me, you got kids. Like we're trying to do them at 10 p.m. The dog next door is still barking. And you're like
Yeah.
exhausted from the day because you
Hmm.
don't have any time during the day. You got all the other stuff, and like and then you agonize over it because you're having to judge it yourself. Like, what's the best take that I did? In the good old days,
You
you
don't
go
have the
into the
help.
room.
Yeah.
Yeah, you go into the room and I'd be talking to you and you'd be like, Gene, why don't you like adjust this part? And like, I really thought you hit that moment, but
Yeah.
like bring in this like component to the last like phrase of it. And you'd be like, okay. And you'd try to do it. And that was it. And everyone got about their 15 minutes or whatever.
Yeah.
And there was something live to it. And of course there was like an exciting thing about going into rooms and you're like, I'm such a unique person. And I'd go in and see like 15 other unique people that
Just
look
look
strangely like me.
exactly like you. Yeah. That is something that's always like weirded me out a little bit is going into a casting room and just seeing the same exact person, just a little bit different,
Yeah,
and you're like, wow, there's a lot of talent here, you know,
yeah,
and
yeah.
maybe you find the right one, maybe you don't. But so speaking of casting from an indie perspective, how did your approach as an actor change from like a bigger project to a smaller project? So if you were going in for an audition for a short film, how would that be different than if you were going for a network series or a studio film?
Oh, I don't think the process changed for me at all.
Hmm.
Ever. I looked at everything as the same. I mean, I went after it, obviously there's slightly different, you adjust your technique a bit, but like I went after everything the exact same way. Maybe that was my downfall. I don't know, but I think great actors just act,
Yeah.
and I don't think it's the medium. Yes, like theater is really exciting because it's live and you don't get to go back and you have to roll with whatever happens, and like you're catching waves and you're relying on technique to get you through some nights. And some nights it's not, you think you totally phoned it in, it was garbage, and everyone's like, that's the best I've ever seen it. Or like a lot of times in plays, like you finish the run and then you're like, holy shit, how did I not have those clicks about all
Yeah.
those whole sections? It makes so much sense now and it's
But you can't
over.
play anymore. Yeah, it's done.
And film and TV are different, and like indie, like I'm even dealing with this on this horror film that I'm working on. Like it's period piece, and it's got a great budget, and it's got great actors, and it's gonna
Hmm.
be awesome. But you still only, because like there's a budget, and you only get so many goes at certain gags or certain things, and like the resets are so costly and so
Hmm.
expensive, and especially
Especially
like,
for a horror film.
yeah, and you're
Yeah.
trying to bang out a feature in 20 days, and it's
Hmm.
super ambitious. It's massive, like scope, and so everything has to be adjusted. So in that capacity, you need actors who are dialed. You do not need to like. We have a great casting director, and we have a lot of conversations about. We don't have to. He said something to me the other day. He was like, "This." We were just talking about actors. Like this actress. He said, I don't know if she's the absolute best for it. I don't know if it's like you're like rolling the dice at a certain point. It's like, I don't
Hmm.
know if she's the absolute best, but I know that you're going to make this movie in 20 days and she's going to be able to helm that every single day. And he didn't say it there was no judgment on the actor in any
Hmm.
capacity, But what I heard was, right, I need someone. I am not going to have the time to pull a performance out of someone. I need somebody to be as closely aligned to it as possible, but also someone that can do the job and like helm a film and hold a film. And that's really difficult. And
That's
like,
tough. Yeah.
yeah, so I think there's a lot of things. I think every actor should be. I hope every actor in their life, like I used to say about commercials. I was like, hope every actor gets one national commercial to see what it can do for them, because
Hmm.
it can really change your life like a degree. Me, it led me on a path of making movies. Maybe disaster, who knows? But that's where I used that type of stuff, and and I feel like every actor, I hope they get to play the lead in a play. I
Yeah.
hope they get to play the lead in a film and get to hold on to that and like understand what it is. Like, yeah, I want them to play every kind of role, but like it goes back to that thing we talked about in some other episode where it's like you learn from your successes, you learn from your failures.
Hmm.
I want you to have the opportunity to helm a film and understand the nuance of doing that from day to day. And of course, you're going to shoot out of order, so you have to be like you have to have a hold of the craft to understand how to do that and how to bring it. You can't just kind of willy nilly it. It doesn't work. Um, and I think there's something to that. I think you get like if you get that to put that into your system and you're like, I know what the leading person role feels like, and I think that's a good thing for you to hold on to. Again, I keep going back to like I've had movies that I've been a part of in some capacity premiere at the some of the best film festivals in the world, and it is fucking fun and it
Hmm.
feels great, and
Yeah, it
you like
does.
see the resource and the machinery and it's exciting. But I've also been at a film festival for like one of the movies I made in I'm not going to shout out the town because I don't want to embarrass them, but it was like the closing night film,
Hmm.
and I went and I was like, oh, closing night, that's awesome. That's gonna be great. Like, and this is a small Midwestern city, and I was like, this will be cool. Like, it's great. That's a great slot.
Hmm.
And it was me and the usher. And
Ooh.
and I like showed up and I was like, holy cow. But the usher
Yeah.
started asking me questions. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna be here for this.
You did
I'm gonna be here for this.
it.
God bless this
Yeah.
person. I'm gonna be here for
A
him.
one-on-one
And I just
Q&A.
sat and talked to him the
Yeah.
whole time. And I was like, that's the yin and the yang, the high and the low, the.
That's interesting. We definitely see that gradient of intensity from smaller film festivals to bigger film festivals, because even I've been to some big indie film festivals here in Los Angeles, and you walk in and there's 5 people watching the film, and sometimes it's a full house, and it just depends on what you put into it, what the festival puts into it, and just the energy that it comes with into the film festival. But bringing it back to casting, as a director, what are you looking for, and how do you tune your approach to finding talent for the range of budgets that you work with?
I mean, again, I'm always gonna look for like just great actors
Hmm.
first and
So when you
foremost.
say great actors, like, is that an instinctual feeling, or are there certain milestones that you have in your head that you're like, they've hit that?
No, because I think people can be great and they've never gotten a job, and I
Mm,
think they can be Meryl Streep,
yeah.
and obviously obvious. I think you look for someone who I I mean, you hear it a lot. Casting is 90, they always assign some kind of percentage to it, 90% of it. It's
Hmm.
pretty true. I mean, there's a lot of things that are true about it. Like, I think that's the same thing with getting personnel on your crews. Like, you
Hmm.
want people who have the vibe that you have and understand it and see it. It doesn't mean that people can't evolve and shift and find your vision. But if you got some people who understand it, it's so much easier. You're speaking the same language. If I cast you and I'm like, I want a person that's just like that's close to Yarrow, I'm like, oh wow, I got this guy that comes in, he's pretty close. I don't have to do a lot of work. And that's frustrating to hear. And yes, there are exceptions to it, and you always want to be able to stretch. Like, so you go to school and you play every role. You play grandparents when you're like
Hmm.
20, and you
Yeah.
stretch into every role possible. And um but I think probably what happens is you look for people who inherently have some of those qualities. Or like obviously if you're lucky enough, who knows what Meryl Streep is like? I mean, certainly people do, and but like who the fuck knows what she's actually like, when she's at home alone. And I don't care because I know that she can do all of these things, and like I could cast her as that. Is this a fern? That's fern. I
Yeah.
could cast her as that fern. She'd probably be a pretty dynamic fern, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think you just look for the best people, and obviously you want like depending on the roles you're filling in, like, you have to, an indie, you have like roles that maybe only play for a day or 2 days or 3 days or a week, and you're like, let me try to see if I can get some names that can do X, Y, or
Hmm.
Z, and you can go down that whole path. And like, but there's truths to it where like if you can squeeze in people who you're not gonna give them a bunch of direction. These are hefes. They're gonna come in. They're gonna like
Do
blow
the
out.
job.
They're gonna blow it out, and you're gonna be like, "Thank you, sir. May I have another or not?" And
Yeah,
you're
because
gonna
you only
go
have them for
home.
one day. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because I wanted to ask about casting from a producerial standpoint because there is that idea of bringing, I don't want to say a name, but someone who is a recognizable actor. You pay them for a day, which is something you can probably afford on a $1 million budget. They do the day, but then you kind of make them maybe a little bit bigger of a part of the film in the grand scheme of things.
Hmm.
And then that film has a lot more legs because people look at the poster and go, "Oh, I know that face,"
Hmm.
you know. And then maybe it's that throwback to when stars used to sell movies, and I think that's less of a thing now. But maybe it isn't.
Well, I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but there's a lot of movies out there. I'm sure your queues are as expansive as mine. Sometimes I just watch trailers and don't watch anything at all because there's so many options. I've got
That's
decision fatigue.
I read synopses. So
Yeah.
like if I see a film like, wow, that's great, never gonna watch it because there's just too much stuff to watch.
Yeah.
I'll go to Wikipedia, I'll read the synopsis and be like, that's a cool movie, and move
Yeah.
on.
I mean, even within genres, there's every remix of it of
Mm-hmm.
all time and like
Mm-hmm.
fusion. And you're like,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of content out there. And so I think that's a way to sell. There's the whole financing part, which, names, et cetera, whatever that
Can
whole
you
thing
speak
is.
a little bit more about that? Because I know you have worked within that kind of sphere a little bit, where you're like, I need money. Let me see
Yeah.
if I can find someone who can maybe be more attractive to make the movie more attractive to financiers.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a formula out there. I mean,
I don't think there is
it's
with
like
film. I think you have to reinvent it every single time.
I feel like you hear a lot of we got to get foreign sales, but there's only three people who sell movies, and you're like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
And there's all these other people. I don't really know about that stuff. I think that's not my area of
Mhm.
expertise. Like I want to make the best movies possible. I want the best actors possible. I'm willing to take risks on people. And there's also a part of it, and I think you are naive if you don't think that when you get teams and you have people giving you money to make a product,
Mhm.
that they're going to have needs and things that they're going to require to do that.
Mhm.
And it's a tremendous luxury, like Francis Ford Coppola, Megapolis, like throwing around his own money and doing that. And like you hear of the Hollywood like fight of against the studios and stuff. And that's awesome for the singular auteurs who've had those fights. And like, yeah, they're versions of that, but most people don't ever get to that spot. So I
Yeah.
think you're kind of lucky if someone, I mean, maybe this is too working class for the dreamer, but like, I think you're pretty lucky if someone wants to give you money to make your movie.
Yeah.
And if I gave somebody $1.5 million or $1, maybe not $1, but
Say a
ten
thousand
million
dollars.
bucks, a
Yeah.
thousand bucks, I'd want a
Yeah.
little bit of some kind of guarantee that you're gonna
Yeah.
finish it
Mhm.
well as possible. It's obviously a risk. Like
Mhm.
I'm banking on you, I'm banking on your team, I'm banking on the cast, and if you tell me, like a lot of filmmakers are like, we're gonna get this person and that person or whatever, and like we know that that's all like fugazi, you don't know if that's
Mhm.
like real. And like we know there's a million stories about actors not showing up to set or
Yeah.
falling out a week before, getting
Mhm.
the new Marvel job, and they're of course going to leave your little indie movie like they should. I mean, it'd be nice if they
Stayed
shot
for a
yours and
day
then went
and
and
then
did the
went on.
Marvel.
Yeah.
I'll take you. Can you do a
Yeah.
voice in the background so we can put you on the DVD
Yeah.
cover or whatever
Just
people
starring
need to
the name.
sell? Yeah,
Yeah.
but I mean that's a common thing. How many times you see movies starring somebody and you're like, they were in it for a day
Yeah.
or
Well,
for one scene,
that was the Bruce Willis approach for like the latter end of his career. He was trying to bank so much on. I don't want to say bank. I don't know if bank is the right word, but he was trying to kind of wrap up as many films as he possibly could because he was getting sick and
Yeah.
he wanted to kind of leave a legacy. But he did a lot of those films where they paid him $1 million. He came in for a day or two, shot his scenes out, and that's it. And he's in the movie.
Yeah.
Maybe not as the lead, but as the supporting mentor slash bad guy. You know.
I mean, I think an important part of it is we can talk about all of these different avenues of casting, but when you think about it as an actor, you're such a small part of the decision making
Yeah.
process. I mean, obviously, like a Brad Pitt Plan B is like a big, much bigger
Well,
decision,
he's also producing,
you know.
so
Well,
he's
for
making a
sure. So
decision
he's
about
making
casting himself.
decisions,
Yeah.
but like he gets, those whatever those names are, obviously get things moving.
Mhm.
But even you hear about all of those, like you hear tremendous stories about some of the best movies of all time taking 12 years,
Yeah.
8 years. It got shuffled around and canceled 500 times. I mean, it's almost miraculous if something gets made, and it's even more miraculous if it's good.
Mhm.
And so there's a part of me that's like I think a takeaway that I've seen is if you can get enough things that it seems to me that like a lot of the most interesting filmmakers have a lot of different irons going, and I
Mhm.
think what that is, my takeaway is that they're protecting against the system, because you don't know if someone's going to drop out and your movie's going to get canceled or
Be
pushed.
dead in the
You
water.
don't
Yeah.
know if like the studio is going to go under. You don't know if they're going
Or
to
get
give you,
sold. Yeah.
yeah, or like the executives are going to change, or like you just don't, there's a million components to it. And if you have like a handful of projects that you're really passionate about and they're all going, and if any of them happens, that's great. Like what a good way to go. And like you're in good shape. Don't waste your time on stuff that's you're not willing to go to the mat for. Because what
Yeah.
if that one happens and it's like the
Yeah.
shittiest of the 17 projects you got, and you're like anyone but this,
Now
and
you're
maybe
devoted to that for 5 years of your life.
yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
hopefully they pay you a whole bunch of money and
True.
you
True.
get to
True.
like
Yeah. Well, here's one final question.
yeah.
If you we started off this podcast talking about how you walk in and you kind of take a moment. I used to when you used to go in and audition live, just so people would pay attention. How would you? What advice would you give for actors auditioning via Zoom? How do you bring that sort of attention grabbing approach to a
Hmm.
Zoom audition?
I don't know. I think a lot of look, I've studied with a lot of amazing acting teachers and artists, and so like everything you're hearing is just what I've learned and taken from other people.
Mm-hmm.
I have a thing that I've actually been doing with my kid, with my son who's like 3.5, and being like, he's either full lover boy or absolute tyrant. But it was when he's being like tyrant, you're trying to like rein him, you're like trying to figure out how to rein him in, settle him down, get back on this planet, because he's like off spinning.
Yeah.
He's in like a cosmic journey of terrible. And a funny thing that I saw recently was I was like, how do I just bring him back to Earth and bring him into the room? And I was like, give me your hand, and we're like holding hands there. And I was like, just look at me. And I was like, why don't you feel your shirt,
Mm-hmm.
feel your shirt collar. And I've heard this from multiple people. Shout out to Carl Bury as one of them. But I've heard it from multiple people. It's like, if you get lost, you just grab onto something real and start from there. And so I think what my advice would be, and it's, for whatever it is, and like whenever I would teach, I like students, actors and stuff, and I'd seen a lot of people is like, whatever just brings you into the room, to start it off. And I think that's the same. I think what I was just trying to do was find a real place where I could be present with the people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously you have a camera, you're not in the room with them, so you have to find a way to do that on your own. And I think if you can find a little way to just bring yourself into the room of the audition, they will feel that, see that, and like lean forward. And I think that would be my best attempt at it. And the rest is like fugazi. It's not,
Yeah.
that's out of your control,
Yeah. There's a lot that's out of our control, but we can always stay present
Mm-hmm.
and keep moving forward. I want to talk about your experience with all the filmmakers you've worked with, but I think we'll save that for next week.
Yeah.
So, Gene,
Next week.
thank you for coming by.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for listening. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us at the CFA studio for another series of the Anywood podcast. You can find the podcast wherever you find your podcasts or on YouTube at the Cinematography for Actors YouTube channel. See you next week.
From the CFA network, Cinematography for Actors is bridging the gap through education and community building. Find out about us and listen to our other podcast at cinematographyforactors.com.
Cinematography for Actors Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit. For more information on fiscal sponsorship, donations, because we're tax exempt now, so it's a tax write-off, and upcoming education, you can email us at contact@cinematographyforactors.com. Thanks.